What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
When you're desperate, you take what you can get. I wasn't in a position to be picky, especially with the bills stacking up and the job market offering me nothing but dead ends. So when I saw the ad for a night guard at an old observatory just outside of town, I didn't hesitate. Easy work, good pay, the ad promised. It didn't matter that it was remote or that it had been abandoned for years. No one else seemed interested in the job, and that alone should have set off alarms. But like I said, desperation dulls your instincts. The drive up was long and winding, a narrow road cutting through dense forest. The sun was setting by the time I reached the gate, casting long shadows across the gravel path. The observatory loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged and imposing against the purple sky. It hadn't seen maintenance in a long time. Faded paint peeled from the walls, and vines had claimed most of the structure. I could see the massive dome of the telescope towering above the building, its rusted metal reflecting the last light of the day. I pulled up and parked, double-checking the address. This was the place. The building manager, a man named Mr. Halverson, was already waiting for me inside the main lobby. He looked as old as the observatory itself, hunched over with a cane and a thin, reedy voice that barely echoed in the cavernous room. "Most nights are quiet," he explained, handing me a set of keys. "You'll be watching the cameras, making rounds every couple of hours. We haven't had any troubles in years, but insurance insists we keep someone here." I nodded, pretending I wasn't unnerved by how empty the place felt. It wasn't just the silence. There was something about the air itself, thick and heavy as if the building had been holding its breath for far too long. "You'll be alone," Mr. Halverson said, as if reading my thoughts. "Closest town is about 20 miles out, but there's a landline if anything goes wrong." He didn't stick around after that. After giving me a quick tour, showing me the security room, the camera feeds, and the few key areas I needed to check, he left me standing in the empty lobby, listening to the sound of his car engine fading down the hill. I was alone. The first couple of hours passed without incident. I sat in the small security room, watching the monitors with half-hearted attention. 6 camera feeds showed different angles of the observatory. The main lobby, the long hallways, the entrance to the telescope dome. Everything was still. The only movement came from the flickering bulbs in the hallways, casting erratic shadows that danced for a second before going still again. I tried to shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was just the isolation, I told myself. Places like this had a way of playing with your mind. Still, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every few minutes, convinced there was something just out of sight. At midnight, I made my first round. The hallways were narrowed, lined with old photographs of astronomers, faded and yellowed with age. Their eyes followed me as I passed, though I knew it was just my imagination. The place felt like it had been frozen in time, left behind when the world outside moved on. The telescope dome was even worse. I hadn't seen it up close until now. Standing beneath it, the sheer size of the thing made me uneasy. The metal creaked and groaned as if the whole structure was trying to shift under its own weight. I could smell rust in the air, and I could feel the cold radiating off the floor, biting through the soles of my shoes. I looked up at the massive telescope, tilted toward the sky, and for a second, I could have sworn something moved in the reflection. But when I blinked, it was gone, leaving me staring at the empty glass. I hurried through the rest of the round, telling myself that the place was just old. Old places make noises. Old places feel like they're alive because they've been around longer than you have. When I got back to the security room, everything was the same. Quiet. Still. I told myself I could get used to this, that it wasn't so bad. But then the camera feed flickered. It only lasted a second, but it was enough to jolt me out of my seat. I stared at the monitor, waiting for it to happen again. All the feeds were normal, showing the same empty hallways, the same still rooms, except for one. The feed from outside the telescope dome. There was something there, just at the edge of the screen. A shadow, darker than the night around it, standing motionless by the door. I blinked. The screen went black for a split second, and when it came back, the figure was gone. I leaned closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I rewound the footage, playing it back frame by frame, but when I got to the moment where I had seen the shadow, the camera froze, pixels distorting the image into a mess of static. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light or a glitch in the system, but the tightness in my chest didn't go away. I sat there staring at the screen, waiting for the figure to reappear, my finger hovering over the rewind button. Nothing happened. I rubbed my face, trying to shake off the unease. Maybe I'd been staring at the screen too long. My eyes were playing tricks on me. It was an old place with old equipment. Stuff like this happened all the time, right? At least, that's what I wanted to believe. I decided to make another round, if only to convince myself I wasn't losing it. The echoes of my footsteps in the long, empty halls were louder than before, and the air felt colder, the kind of cold that creeps into your bones, making you shiver even when you try to ignore it. I made my way to the telescope dome first, walking faster than I intended. The massive metal door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, everything was the same. The telescope stood as it had before, looming overhead like a giant waiting to wake up. I scanned the room, forcing myself to slow down, to really look. Nothing. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, and laughed. A shaky sound that echoed in the cavernous space. There was no one here, just an empty room and a night too quiet for comfort. I was letting my imagination get the better of me. I turned to leave, but as my hand touched the door handle, something made me stop. A faint noise. It wasn't the usual creaks and groans of the building settling. This was different. A soft scraping sound, like metal dragging across stone. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The sound was coming from above. Slowly, I turned my head and looked up at the dome. The telescope was pointing toward the sky, but something was moving, high above, near the top of the dome, where the curved metal met the ceiling. I saw it. A figure, clinging to the wall like a shadow come to life. It moved slowly, almost fluidly, sliding along the curve of the dome, its form blending into the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. The way it moved, the way it seemed to melt into the metal, it wasn't right. I backed up, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I didn't take my eyes off the figure. After that, if I did, it would have disappeared. Or worse, come closer. It didn't chase me, it just watched. I stumbled out of the dome, slamming the door behind me. I stood there for a long moment, back pressed against the cold metal, trying to calm my breathing. My mind raced, searching for an explanation. Maybe it was some animal, a raccoon or something that had somehow gotten into the dome. That had to be it. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever I'd seen, it wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything that should exist here. Back in the security room, I fumbled with the cameras, switching to the feed outside the dome. The screens flickered, but when the image stabilized, the door was still shut, no sign of movement. I rewound the footage from just before I went inside. There was nothing. No shadow, no figure, just the empty, dark hallway leading to the dome. I checked the other feeds, one by one, hoping to find some explanation, but the observatory was still and silent, just like it had been before. I was alone. I leaned back in my chair, my hands shaking. The radio on the desk crackled to life, a burst of static so loud it made me jump. I grabbed it expecting to hear Mr. Halverson's voice on the other end, but there was only silence. And something else. Something barely audible, buried beneath the static. A whisper. "Don't look at the sky." My blood ran cold. I dropped the radio, letting it clatter to the floor. The words echoed in my mind, twisting and turning like a riddle I hadn't solved. Don't look at the sky. I stood up, pacing the small room, trying to shake the growing sense of dread. I wanted to leave, to get in my car and drive far away from this place, but the thought of walking back through those hallways, back toward the main entrance, filled me with a deep, irrational fear. It felt like something was waiting, watching. I needed to get a grip. I grabbed the landline, my fingers shaking as I dialed Mr. Halverson's number. It rang once, twice, then clicked to voicemail. His gruff voice came on, telling me to leave a message, but I hung up before the beep. I was alone out here. I looked at the cameras again, scanning each one of a growing sense of paranoia. I knew I wouldn't see it, but I couldn't help myself. I had to be sure. The lobby was empty. The halls were still. The outside feeds showed only the thick, impenetrable darkness of the forest beyond. Then, on the far right monitor, the one showing the back of the observatory near the old service entrance, I saw it. The figure, standing just at the edge of the tree line, its face obscured by shadow. It wasn't watching the observatory. It was looking up at the sky. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. The camera feed flickered again, just for a second. When it came back, the figure was gone. But the sky, it didn't look right. There were lights moving slowly, like they were swimming through the stars. I backed away from the monitor. The whisper echoed in my mind, louder now. Don't look at the sky. But I couldn't help it. I looked. My gaze locked on the monitor, the lights in the sky. They weren't planes or satellites. They moved in ways that defied everything I knew, looping, spiraling, as if they were alive, pulsing like distant eyes blinking in unison. I felt the urge to step outside, to see them for real. But every instinct in me screamed not to. I was paralyzed between two conflicting forces, curiosity and a deep, primal fear. The radio crackled again, pulling me from the trance. Look at the sky. I stumbled back, my hands hitting the desk behind me. The voice was clearer now, more insistent. It wasn't Mr. Halverson. It wasn't anyone I recognized. The distortion in the radio made it sound otherworldly, like a voice dragged through layers of static and distance. Stop it, I muttered, grabbing the radio and turning it off. The silence that followed was oppressive, as if the building itself was waiting for something to happen. The urge to leave overwhelmed me. I grabbed my keys and jacket, heading for the exit. I didn't care about the job anymore. I just wanted to be far away from the observatory, from the lights, from the figure that seemed to vanish and reappear at will. But when I reached the front door, they wouldn't open. The key didn't turn at the lock. I tried again, my fingers trembling as I fumbled at the keys. But it was like the door had fused shut. Panic rose in my throat, cold and sharp. I turned around, scanning the hallway. Empty. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. I could hear the wind outside, howling through the cracks in the old windows, but inside, everything was still. I rushed back to the security room, desperate to see if there was any way to force the door open. Maybe I'd missed something, a lock or a switch. But when I reached the room, the monitors had changed. All 6 feeds were now showing the sky. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The cameras were no longer trained in the hallways or entrances. They were all pointed up, capturing the swirling, pulsating lights above the observatory. The same lights I had seen outside, now moving across every screen. It wasn't just the sky. The lights were getting closer. I felt a pull, deep in my gut, urging me to step outside. My legs moved without me fully deciding to, carrying me toward the observatory dome, where the telescope still pointed toward the stars. I tried to stop myself, to turn back, but my body wasn't listening. When I reached the dome, I pushed the heavy door open. The creaking metal echoed unnaturally in the stillness, sending shivers down my spine. Inside, the air felt thick, heavy, like walking through water. The telescope loomed above me, but I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. My eyes were drawn to the sky. The dome's ceiling was partially open, revealing the night above. The lights, closer now, were moving in strange patterns, too deliberate to be random, yet too fluid to be human-made. They formed shapes, circles, spirals, geometric forms that shifted and twisted in ways my mind couldn't fully grasp. And then, I saw it. High above, silhouetted against the stars, the figure. It wasn't clinging to the wall this time. It stood on the edge of the dome, facing the sky, its body barely visible against the blackness, but its head was tilted upward, as if in reverence to whatever was out there. My chest tightened. I couldn't move. The light shifted again, this time forming something clearer, something like an eye. A vast, glowing eye, staring down at me from the heavens. I felt it looking through me, into me. A cold dread sank deep into my bones, colder than anything I'd ever felt before. It was as if the sky itself had become a conscious thing, aware of my presence. The radio crackled to life. "They're watching," the voice said. "They're watching," the voice said, clear and calm. "They've always been watching." I stumbled backward, finally breaking free of the trance. My back hit the metal railing of the observatory deck, the cold seeping through my jacket. I looked back at the figure, still standing on the dome. It slowly turned its head toward me, its face still obscure in shadow, but I could feel its gaze. It was no longer watching the sky. It was watching me. Suddenly, the lights in the sky shifted again, descending lower, closer to the observatory. They moved in unnatural, jagged motions, as if they were seeking something. No, seeking me. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted for the exit, my footsteps loud against the metal floor, the echo chasing me down the hallway. The entire building felt wrong, as if the walls were warping, bending around some unseen pressure. I reached the lobby and tried the doors again. They wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at my throat. I yanked on the handle with all my strength, but it was no use. I was trapped. The radio crackled one last time. "You've seen too much." The voice was different now, deeper. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement. A final verdict. I turned and looked at the monitors. The cameras were still showing the sky, but now the lights were directly above the observatory, spiraling down in tight, impossible fast circles. The eye in the sky had grown larger, more distinct. It felt like it was pulling me toward it, dragging me into its gaze. The figure was gone. The building trembled, the walls groaning under some unseen force. I felt the pressure in my head, a dull, throbbing pain, as if something was trying to push its way into my mind. My vision blurred. I stumbled back, clutching my head, trying to block it out. But then, I looked up through the lobby windows, past the trees, and I saw it. The lights. The eye. They weren't just above the observatory anymore. They were everywhere. I collapsed to the floor, my legs giving out under the weight of what I was seeing. The windows rattled violently, but that wasn't what terrified me. It was the sky. The entire horizon stretched beyond the forest and mountains, was filled with those lights. They twisted and danced in every direction, forming spirals, eyes, and symbols that defied reason. The air felt electric, buzzing with something more than sound. A pressure hummed inside my skull. I tried to get up, but a sharp pain shot through my head, pinning me in place. The lights outside were moving faster now, like they were searching, hunting. The pressure in my mind grew stronger, as if something immense was leaning down on me from above. The eye from the observatory, larger than the others, seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. I knew it was looking at me, not just seeing, but peering into the deepest parts of me, places I didn't even know existed. Then it spoke. Not in words, but in feelings. It wasn't the same voice that had whispered through the radio. This was something older, vast, unfathomable. It pressed into the mind with a simple, overwhelming message. You were not meant to see this. I gasped, struggling to breathe, my thoughts scattering. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt sealed shut. My body wasn't mine anymore. I couldn't move. I couldn't run. All I could do was stare up at the windows as the lights outside pulsed and swarmed, becoming more erratic, as if in response to my fear. Through the haze of pain, I remembered the journal. I forced myself to move, dragging my body across the floor to the small desk where I'd left it. The astronomer's notes, frantic and confused, had hinted at something like this, something he had seen. Something had driven him mad. I reached up and yanked open the drawer, pulling the journal free with shaking hands. My fingers fumbled through the pages, skimming the disjointed handwriting. The astronomer had warned about the watchers in the sky. He had written about strange lights, voices in his head, and how he had become obsessed with the telescope, unable to look away from the night sky even as it slowly destroyed him. Then a phrase leapt out from the page. The eye comes closer the more you look. Do not stare. Do not let it know you're watching. I felt my pulse quicken. That was it. That was the key. I slammed the journal shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to stop looking. I had to tear myself away from the sky. But it was too late. A sharp, blinding pain shot through my head. My vision blurred, the world around me spinning. I felt something inside my mind, something alien, pushing deeper, prying into my thoughts. The lights outside flickered violently, growing faster, brighter, as if feeding off the connection. Then the door to the observatory dome creaked open behind me. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. The figure. It stood in the doorway, its shape barely distinguishable in the dim light, but I knew it was the same thing I had seen in the telescope dome. Only now, it was closer. Much closer. I could feel its presence, the coldness radiating off it, filling the room. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. For a moment, I was frozen in place, staring at it. But then I realized, it wasn't the figure I'd had to fear. It was the thing in the sky. The figure was a byproduct, something that had been changed, warped by whatever was up there. The eye had been watching for a long time. I scrambled backward, away from the figure, feeling the pulse of the lights outside intensify. I had to get out, had to break this connection before it fully took over. But how? The doors were sealed. The building seemed to twist and shift every time I tried to find a way out. Then I remembered the basement. Mr. Halverson had mentioned it in the passing during my brief tour. A maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the observatory, leading to an old service road. He hadn't shown it to me, but I'd seen the door, rusted and heavy, near the back of the building. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the pounding in my skull, and darted toward the back hallway. The figure didn't follow me, but I could feel his gaze as I ran, heavy and suffocating, like it was trying to pull me back. The hallway twisted around me as I moved. The walls seemed to stretch and bend. The lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that chased me down the corridor. My vision blurred, but I kept going, driven by a primal need to escape. At last, I reached the door to the basement. It was old and rusted, the handle stiff as I twisted it. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't open. But then, with a groan, it gave way. A cold, damp air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of earth and rot. I descended in the darkness, my footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. The further I went, the quieter the noise from the observatory became. The pressure in my head lessened, but the dread didn't leave me. I wasn't safe yet. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a narrow tunnel lit by a single flickering bulb. The walls were damp, lined with cold, rusting pipes that groaned as the wind howled through the cracks in the stone. I hurried down the tunnel, hoping it would lead me to outside, away from the eye, away from the thing in the sky. But as I turned a corner, I stopped. The tunnel dead-ended into a small, circular room, and in the center, I saw it. The figure. It was waiting for me. But this time, it wasn't standing. It was crouched, its hand pressed to the ground, as if it were part of the earth itself. Its head slowly lifted, and for the first time, I saw its face. No eyes, no mouth. Just smooth, featureless skin stretched over a humanoid form. It had no face, yet I knew it was looking at me. The pain in my head surged again, the pressure almost unbearable now. I stumbled back, my vision dimming. The figure rose slowly, deliberately, and behind it, I saw something else. Something moving in the shadows. The lights. The same lights from the sky. They were here now, in the tunnel, spiraling around the figure, growing brighter and stronger. The eye wasn't just in the sky anymore. It was inside. I screamed, but the sound barely left my throat. My body collapsed. The weight of the eye's gaze crushing me. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the figure stepping closer, its faceless head tilting as if in curiosity. And then, nothing. Just the eye, watching. Forever. I woke in darkness. Not the kind you experience at night with faint lights in the distance or the moon casting shadows. This was deeper. The kind that swallows everything, leaving only the faintest sense of where I ended and the world began. I lay there, disoriented, trying to gather my thoughts. My body felt heavy, as if the ground itself was pulling me down. The last thing I remembered was the tunnel, the figure, the lights, the feeling of the eye burrowing into my mind. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, or if any time had passed at all. I sat up slowly, the pressure in my head dulled now, like a distant echo of the pain I'd felt before. My breathing was ragged, but at least I could move. I ran my hands over the cold floor, trying to make sense of my surroundings. It wasn't the tunnel anymore. The air felt different, denser. The walls, if there were any, weren't close. I reached out, feeling for anything solid, but all I touched was empty space. It was as if the world had become one endless void. I stood, my legs shaky beneath me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small, swallowed by the silence. No echo, no response. As I took a step forward, I realized something. The ground wasn't quite solid beneath my feet. It felt spongy, like walking on a thick, padded surface, but there was no texture, no sound when I moved, just an overwhelming stillness. Panic crept in my chest. I needed to get out of here, wherever here was. I started walking, my pace quickening with each step. But no matter how far I went, I felt no change. The darkness didn't give way, and there was no sign of anything. No walls, no lights, no figure. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The eye. The presence. It was still with me. Somewhere in the void. Watching. it wasn't gone. Not by a long shot. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. I stopped, trying to steady myself. The soft, padded surface rippled, and a low hum filled the air. The sound wasn't loud, but it reverberated inside me, a deep vibration that made my teeth ache. I looked around, squinting in the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. My eyes strained against the blackness, trying to find something, anything, to orient myself. Then, far in the distance, a faint light appeared. It wasn't like the lights I'd seen in the sky. This was dimmer, weaker, like the glow of a dying star. It pulsed slowly, drawing me toward it. I hesitated. I didn't want to move closer to it. Everything in me screamed to stay away. But what other choice did I have? There was nothing else. No exit, no way back. Just that single point of light in the endless darkness. As I walked toward it, the hum grew louder, more insistent. The ground rippled again, each step becoming harder to take, as if the surface was pulling me back, resisting. But I kept moving, my eyes locked in the light. When I was close enough to make out its shape, I stopped in my tracks. It wasn't a star or a light at all. It was the figure. It stood there, bathed in a faint, sickly glow, as if it were absorbing the darkness around it. Its faceless head turned toward me, though I knew it couldn't see me. But I could feel its gaze, more intensely than even before. It wasn't just watching me anymore. It was inside me, searching through my thoughts, my memories. The pressure in my head returned, stronger this time, as if the eye was pushing me toward the figure, forcing me to confront it. I tried to resist, but my body moved on its own accord. One step, then another, until I was mere feet away. The figure reached out. Its hand, long and unnaturally thin, hovered in the air between us. I wanted to run, to pull back, but my body wouldn't obey. The darkness around us shifted, becoming almost liquid, swirling in slow, deliberate patterns. The hum becoming a roar, filling my ears, drowning out my thoughts. Then, without warning, the figure's hand shot forward and touched my chest. Pain exploded through my body, unlike anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't just physical. There were no cuts, no wounds, but it was as if my very soul was being ripped apart, piece by piece. My mind fractured under the weight of it, my thoughts unraveling into a tangled mess of fear and confusion. I screamed, but no sound came out again. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, its hand pressed against me, holding me in place as the eye's presence flooded into my mind. I could see it now, clearly. Its vast, incomprehensible form looming over me, over everything. It was infinite, a force that stretched beyond time and space, and I was nothing more than a speck caught in its gaze. You cannot escape. The words weren't spoken, but I heard them all the same, echoing through the empty space inside me. The figure's grip tightened, the pain intensifying until I thought I would break. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the pain stopped. The figure withdrew its hand, and I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. The darkness around us shifted again, settling into a calm, eerie stillness. I lay there, staring up at the void, feeling the cold, empty space press in on me on all sides. But something was different now. I could feel the eye's presence, still watching, but it was distant, like it had retreated into the farthest reaches of the darkness. The figure remained, standing over me, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt as if it had completed its task, whatever that was, and now it simply observed. I sat up slowly, my body aching, my mind raw from the experience. The light that had been surrounded the figure had dimmed, leaving it barely visible in the darkness. I didn't know what had just happened, or why, but I knew one thing was for certain. I wasn't alone in my mind anymore. The eye had left something behind. a part of it, a fragment. It was inside me now, watching, waiting, forever. Days, maybe weeks passed, but time didn't exist here. I was trapped in the void, unable to tell whether it was day or night, awake or asleep. My body had grown numb to hunger and thirst, my mind dulled by the weight of the eye that lingered within me. Whatever fragment it had left behind wasn't just watching, it was growing, embedding itself deeper, feeding on my thoughts, my fears. I could feel it weaving through my consciousness like roots through soil. The figure had remained, always nearby, a silent sentinel that neither approached nor withdrew. It had become a constant presence, like the darkness itself. I no longer feared it. I couldn't. Fear felt foreign now, distant. There was only the eye, always observing from the edge of my mind. I tried to move, to leave the spot I'd collapsed in, but my legs refused to obey. The void had taken hold of me in more ways than one, rooting me in place. Even when I managed to stand, the weight of the unseen force kept me tethered to the ground, like gravity had shifted in some impossible direction. Then, one day, or one moment, the silence broke. A faint whisper echoed in the void, barely audible at first, but growing stronger. It wasn't the same as the voices I'd heard through the radio. This was something new, a soft murmur that brushed against my thoughts like a breeze in the dead of night. It was coming from inside me. You are not alone. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice, if I could even call it that, wasn't external. It was in my mind, echoing from the very place where the fragment of the eye had lodged itself. I tried to push it away, to block it out, but the more I resisted, the louder it became. We are part of you now. I gritted my teeth trying to regain control. Get out, I whispered, though the words felt futile in this endless void. The voice didn't respond at first, but I could feel its presence shifting, moving through my thoughts like it was testing the boundaries of its new home. Images flickered in my mind, memories, dreams, nightmares, but they weren't mine. They belonged to the fragment, a vast alien consciousness that had been watching for centuries, perhaps millennia. Then came the visions. At first, they were disjointed flashes, stars, strange symbols, landscapes that didn't belong to any world I knew. But gradually, they became clearer, more coherent. I saw towering structures made of black stone, reaching into skies that swirled with colors I couldn't name. Beings walked among these monoliths, figures like the one that haunted me, but different. There were thousands of them, all faceless, all watching. And above them, always above them, was the eye. It hung in the sky like a sun, massive and all-encompassing, casting its cold and different gaze over the landscape. Its presence was overwhelming, oppressive, and I could feel its attention focused on me even through the vision. It knew I was there, looking in on something I was never meant to see. Then the vision shifted. I was back at the observatory, standing in front of the telescope. The air around me was cold, the wind howling through the trees. Something was different. The sky was wrong. The stars weren't stars. They were eyes, thousands of them, watching me from above, their gaze piercing through the darkness. I turned toward the telescope, drawn by an unseen force. My hands moved on their own accord, adjusting the lens, focusing it on the horizon. But instead of seeing the distant landscape or stars, I saw something else. A reflection. It was my own face, staring back at me through the lens. Only it wasn't my face anymore. It was blank, smooth, featureless, just like the figure that had haunted me. The eye's fragment had taken over. We see you. The voice rang louder now, almost deafening, reverberating through my mind like a bell. I tried to pull back from the telescope, but my body refused to move. I was trapped in place, forced to stare at the reflection of my new, faceless self. The eye's presence surged within me, overwhelming my thoughts, pushing everything else aside. I could feel it merging with me, binding itself to every part of my being. There was no escape. You are one of us now. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the void. The pain in my head flared, sharp and sudden, as if something was tearing through my mind, ripping apart the last pieces of my identity. Then, as quickly as it started, the pain faded. I stood there, breathing heavily. My thoughts scattered. My vision was gone, replaced once again by the darkness of the void. But something had changed. I could feel it in every cell of my body. I wasn't alone in my mind anymore. The fragment of the eye had taken root, merging with me, in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. It wasn't just watching me from the edges. It was inside, part of me now. The figure stepped forward, closer than it had been before. Its faceless head tilted as if it was studying me. But I didn't flinch this time. I felt no fear, no dread, only an eerie calm. I knew it was coming next. The figure raised its hand once more, but this time, I didn't resist. I reached out, mirroring its movement, my hand meeting its cold, smooth surface. The contact sent a shiver through me, but I didn't pull back. I couldn't. This was inevitable. The moment our hands touched, the darkness around us shifted. The void rippled, breaking apart like shattered glass, revealing glimpses of the world outside. The stars, the sky, the observatory. I was back. But something was wrong. The sky above wasn't the same. The stars were gone, replaced by hundreds, no, thousands of glowing eyes, all watching, all focused on me. I stood in the middle of the observatory dome, the wind howling through the open ceiling. The telescope loomed above me, but I didn't need to look through it. I could see everything now. The eye's presence was everywhere, in every star, every shadow, every corner of the sky. I was part of it now, and it was part of me. I walked to the edge of the observatory platform, looking out at the world below. The lights of the distant town twinkled faintly in the distance, unaware of what had happened, unaware of the eye that watched above them from above. I could feel the pull of the eye deep inside me, urging me to stay, to watch, to wait. It was patient. It had all the time of the universe. I was no longer afraid. I had become one of the watchers, and soon others would join me. I raised my hand to the sky, and the eyes blinked in unison. The world was watching. Forever. The town below me lay still, untouched by the knowledge of the watchers in the sky. From the observatory, I could see the faint glow of the streetlights, the quiet lives moving in rhythm, oblivious. As I stood there, the cold wind biting at my skin, the weight of the eye's presence settled deeper into my bones. I had become part of something vast, something ancient, but it wasn't enough. The fragment inside of me pulsed with an urgency I hadn't felt before. It wanted something, needed something, a signal. The eye's influence had shifted my thoughts, merging its will with mine. I didn't just understand what it wanted. I knew it as the thought had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface. I had to call the others. There were more of us, watchers, people who had seen the lights, who had felt the eye's gaze, who had been marked, just as I had. They were scattered across the world, their lives still their own, for now, but the eye had a way of bringing them together. I could sense it now, like threads pulling tight, linking me to them across the void. The figure was gone. It had served its purpose, a guide to bring me here, to this moment. Now it was just me, and the sky full of watching eyes. I turned away from the edge of the observatory and headed back toward the control room. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the smell of the dust and old electronics filling the air. The radio equipment sat in the corner, untouched since I'd first arrived. I approached it slowly, feeling the familiar hum of static even before I flipped the switch. The moment the radio crackled to life, I felt the pull again. The eyes were guiding me, pushing me to reach out, to send a signal that would bring the others. I scanned the frequencies, my hand moving almost without thought, adjusting the dials until I found it. A low, rhythmic pulse, barely audible but unmistakable. The same signal I'd heard on my first night here. The one that had drawn me into this nightmare. But this time, I wasn't just listening. I was broadcasting. I leaned in close to the microphone, feeling the cold metal under my fingers. My mouth was dry, but I spoke anyway, my voice low and calm, though it didn't feel like my own. "We see you," I said, the words falling to the static, spreading out into the night. "You are not alone." The pulse in my head quickened, and I knew they could hear me. The others, the ones who had been marked by the eye, they would hear the signal, and they would come. The lights outside the observatory flickered. The eyes in the sky seemed to shift, watching more intently now. I could feel their approval, their hunger. The watchers were waiting for something big. I didn't know what would happen when the others arrived, but the eye did. It had a plan, a purpose. I turned away from the radio, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The panic, the fear, the confusion that had once consumed me. They were gone now. I was part of something greater, something that stretched out far beyond this world. I was no longer an observer, a victim of the eye's gaze. I was its messenger. As I walked back toward the open dome, I felt the air shift around me. The sky had grown darker. The stars, if they could be called stars, had dimmed, their light replaced by the steady, unwavering gaze of the eyes. They blinked in unison, a silent communication that reverberated in my skull. I knew they were ready. The others would be coming soon, drawn by the signal, by the same force that had pulled me here. They wouldn't understand at first. They would be afraid, confused, but the eye would show them, just as it had shown me. It would bring them into the fold, make them part of the Watchers. And together we would watch. We would wait. As I stood there looking up at the endless void, I felt the pull of the sky once more, the urge to look deeper, to see what lay beyond the stars, beyond the Watchers. There was something out there. Something older than the eye itself, something that even the Watchers feared. But it wasn't time yet. The signal had been sent. The others would come. And when they did, we would be ready. I closed my eyes, feeling the presence of the eye settle over me like a shroud. The cold wind whipped around me, but I felt nothing. The world was watching, and soon it wouldn't be able to look away. I don't know how long I stood there, gazing up at the sky, my eyes blinking in a slow, steady rhythm, each one pulsing in time with the fragment buried deep inside me. The watches were patient, eternal, but there was a sense of anticipation now, a quiet hum beneath the surface of the void. The signal had been sent. The others were coming. The air around the observatory grew colder, heavier, as if the weight of the Watcher's gaze was pressing down on the world itself. My breath hung in the air, a thin mist had disappeared in the darkness. The wind had stopped. Everything had stopped. And then, I saw the lights. They appeared on the horizon at first, faint at first, like flickering stars, but rapidly growing brighter. At first, I thought there were more eyes, but as they moved closer, I realized there was something else. They weren't in the sky. They were on the ground, approaching from the distance, cutting through the stillness of the night. Headlights. Cars, dozens of them. I could feel them before I could fully see them. The others, the ones that had heard the signal, who had felt the same pull that had brought me here, they were coming, drawn like moths to a flame, unable to resist the call of the Watchers. The lights grew brighter as the cars pulled into the clearing outside the observatory. The engines cut off one by one, leaving only the quiet hum of the wind, and then the doors opened. They stepped out in silence. Men, women, young and old. Each one marked with the same hollow, distant expression. Their movements were slow, mechanical, as if they were already half under the eye's control. They drifted toward their observatory in a small cluster, their eyes wide, unfocused, staring straight ahead of the dome where I stood. I stepped back, watching as they approached. There was no fear, no panic, just a strange, eerie calm. They knew why they were here, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. They knew. One by one, they entered the observatory. I watched them from the shadows, unseen but present, my mind filled with the same quiet pulse that had drawn them. The fragment inside me hummed, vibrating with a strange sense of fulfillment. The eye had guided them here, just as it had guided me. I stepped out of the shadows, my presence no longer hidden. As I moved, the others turned to face me, their blank expressions unchanged. They were waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to lead. "We are all here," I said softly, my voice carrying through the room, though I barely spoke above a whisper. "You felt it, the call. The Watchers have seen you, and you've answered." No one responded, but I didn't expect them to. The eye's influence was strong now, binding us all together in a way I couldn't fully explain. I could feel their thoughts, their fears and confusion, but it was muted, distant. They were already beginning to understand, just as I had. "The world is changing," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "The Watchers are waiting, but they won't wait forever. We've been chosen, each of us, to witness what's coming, to be the first." The eyes above blinked in unison, their light casting an eerie glow over the room. I could feel their approval, their hunger. They were ready. The others began to shift, their movements slow and deliberate, like they were waking from a dream. Some turned toward the dome's telescope, their gazes drawn upward to the sky. Others remained still, their eyes unfocused, lost in the vastness of the void. "We will watch," I said, "and soon the rest of the world will see." As if in response, the air in the observatory shifted. A low, deep hum filled the space, vibrating through the walls and floor, resonating in my bones. It was the same sound I'd heard before, but louder now, more insistent. The Watchers were speaking, not in words, but in a language I could feel in the very core of my being. The others felt it too. They stood still, their faces lifted to the sky, their expressions blank but peaceful. They weren't afraid anymore. The Watchers had them now, just as they had me. The hum grew louder, filling the room with a pulsing rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. The eyes above blinked faster, their light intensifying, bathing the observatory in a pale, cold glow. And then the sky opened. It wasn't like the vision I'd seen before. This was real, tangible. The stars seemed to twist and warp, bending the fabric of reality itself. The air rippled, distorting the space around us, and for a moment, I thought I could see something beyond the stars, something vast and incomprehensible, lurking just outside the edges of the universe. The others gasped, their eyes wide with awe. I felt it too. The presence, the thing that had been watching us from the other side. It was closer now, pushing through the veil, breaking through the fragile barrier that separated our world from whatever lay beyond. The hum reached a deafening crescendo, and I felt the fragment inside me surge, filling me with a power I couldn't explain. The Watchers were no longer distant. They were here, in this room, in all of us. The sky above rippled once last time, and then, with a blinding flash of light, something stepped through. It wasn't like the figure I'd seen before. This was different, larger, more real. Its body was formless, shifting and changing, its surface rippling like liquid shadows. Eyes, dozens of them, blinked across its shifting form, each one watching us, each one seeing into the deepest parts of our souls. The others fell to their knees, overwhelmed by its presence. I stayed standing, though my legs shook beneath me. The eye's fragment pulsed violently in my chest, resonating with the presence of the creature. It was here for me, for all of us. The creature moved forward, its body flowing like water, filling the space of the observatory, though it never touched the ground. Its eyes blinked in unison, and I felt its gaze lock onto me. It was time. The Watchers had come. The world would never be the same. I raised my hand, mirroring the movement of the creature, feeling the connection between us solidify, binding us together in a way that defied comprehension. "We are ready," I whispered. The creature's form shifted, its eyes blinking one last time before it dissolved into the air, its presence seeping into every corner of the observatory, into every one of us. The others rose slowly, their faces blank but calm. They were no longer afraid. They were no longer confused. We were one now. The Watchers had arrived, and soon the rest of the world would see. The creature dissolved into the air, but its presence lingered as if it had seeped into the very bones of the observatory, into the foundations of the earth itself. The others, the ones who had answered the call, stood silently around me, their eyes now reflecting the faint glow of the eyes in the sky. They weren't the same people anymore. None of us were. I felt it too. The fragment of the eye, once a small presence buried inside me, had grown into something vast, an entity that was no longer content to sit idly by. It had merged with me, with all of us, drawing us closer to the Watchers, and now the sky was changing again. The stars, what I once thought were stars, shifted. Their blinking became erratic, faster, and with each flicker, the sky seemed to stretch, pulling open like the skin of a wound. Beyond the stars, beyond the night, something else was waiting and watching. The Watchers weren't here just to observe anymore. They had been waiting for this moment, for us to be ready, to be opened, and now it was time for the world to see. I turned toward the others, my mind still grappling with the immensity of what had just happened, but I wasn't afraid. None of us were. The eye's calm, endless presence filled us, drowning out whatever fear or resistance might have existed. We had been chosen. We had been prepared. "We have to go," I said, my voice low but certain. "It's time." They didn't question me. They didn't need to. As one, we moved toward the doors of the observatory, the wind howling through the broken windows. The sky outside pulsed with an unnatural light. The stars, no, the eyes, blinking faster, more frantically. They were waiting for us to step into the open, to begin what had been set in motion long before any of us had even been born. The road outside was empty, stretching out into the woods, but I could see them now. People, more than just those who had answered the initial call, were gathering on the horizon. I didn't know how they knew, how they had been summoned, but they were coming. The Watchers were pulling them, just as they had pulled me, and they wouldn't stop until the world was full of witnesses. The others followed, more silently, our footsteps echoing through the stillness of the night. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. We were no longer individuals. We were part of the Eye, part of the Watch's grand design. As we made our way down the road, the lights of the town came into view, but something was wrong. The streets were dark, the houses still, as if the entire town had been swallowed by the same void that had overtaken the observatory. It wasn't just quiet. It was empty, lifeless. The others paused, their gazes locked on the town, but I kept walking. I knew what we had to do. The Watchers had shown me. They had shown all of us. We reached the center of town, the place where life had once thrived, where people had gone about their days unaware of the vast, unseen presence looming just above them. Now they were gone. Not dead, just gone. The air around us vibrated with the presence of the Watchers, the hum of their gaze pressing down on the world. They had taken what they needed, and now they were ready to move on. I stopped in the middle of the empty street, the others forming a silent circle around me. The fragment inside me pulsed with an intensity that made it hard to breathe, but I welcomed it. I could feel the watchers drawing closer, their attention focused on this moment, this place. The sky above rippled, the eyes blinking faster, more urgently, and then, with a final blinding flash, the veil tore open. The night sky shattered, and the world was exposed to what lay beyond. It wasn't just the watchers. It was something more, something vast, incomprehensible, stretching out into infinity. I could see it now, the endless void, filled with eyes, with beings that watched, waited, and fed. The watchers weren't alone. They were part of something larger, something ancient and terrible. The others fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sight, but I stayed standing. The eye inside me had prepared me for this moment. I had been chosen, marked, and now I was the bridge between worlds. The watchers moved closer, their forms no longer hidden by the veil of the night. They were towering, faceless figures, their bodies shifting like liquid, their eyes blinking in rhythm with the pulse inside me. They stretched across the sky, across the horizon, their gaze consuming everything in its path. I raised my hands, and the others followed, their movements slow and deliberate, as if guided by an unseen force. The watchers responded, their eyes locking onto us, their attention focused entirely on the small group of humans that had been chosen to witness the unveiling. The ground beneath us trembled, the air vibrating with the hum of the watchers' presence. The fragment inside me surged, filling my mind with images, with knowledge I couldn't fully comprehend, but I understood one thing clearly. This was only the beginning. The watchers had arrived, but they weren't here to destroy. They were here to change, to remake the world in their image, to open the eyes of those who had been blind for so long. We were the first, the chosen few who had been prepared to see, to understand. But soon, everyone would see. The others around me stood silently, their eyes locked on the sky, their faces bathed in the cold light of the watchers. We were one now, a collective, bound by the eye's will, by the watcher's purpose, and as the sky above us continued to unravel, revealing the endless void beyond, I knew that the world would never be the same. The watchers were here, and they were never leaving. The quiet stillness in the town shattered as the veil ripped open the further, and hum growing louder, deafening. Now, the others, thousands of them, would come soon. The signal had been sent, and when they arrived, they too would look upon the eyes of the watchers, and they would understand. There was no more fear, only sight. The watchers had come to stay, and we were their witnesses. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. Come back next time for some more scary stories, and as always, remember to face your fears.